World Boxing still hasn't released its gender policy, which was supposed to come into effect on July 1. It requires mandatory sex testing before athletes can compete, but it's not in force at the current World Cup in Kazakhstan. When World Boxing announced its plans on May 30, it singled out one name only, a gold medal Olympian from Paris in 2024. She was at the centre and continues to be at the centre of a public and political shaming campaign. World Boxing has stated that its policy has been crafted by a specially convened working group of the World Boxing Medical and Anti-Doping Committee, which has examined data and medical evidence from an extensive range of sources and consulted widely with other sports and experts across the world. On the 28th of June, I emailed World Boxing and asked who their experts were, who was on this expert panel. In their reply, they did not answer that question. Since then, I've spoken to two members of the group who say it was put together months ago, but since then, they haven't had a single meeting. This is the group that is supposed to advise on World Boxing's gender policy. Here's my interview with one of them, Emeritus Professor Roger Pielke, who is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Well, Roger, it's really great to talk to you again. It's been quite some time, and I've been watching the developments taking place with the newest international governing body in sport, recognised by the IOC, World Boxing. And I know they've been wrestling with their gender policy. I don't know if you can put it that way. I think they're calling it sex, height, weight policy. It was supposed to be out this week. It's not. Did you have any involvement with that? And do you know where they're going with that?
So I was part of a expert committee that was convened by World Boxing to provide input on a gender policy. But we had no input on the policy that has been announced in May and is apparently, according to, I guess, press release, will be made final at the beginning of July. So the expert group I was a part of played no role in that.
So the expert group you were part of, what were you doing, and had you made any recommendations at that point?
So the expert group was convened about 6 or 8 months ago. It's been a while now, but it has done nothing. So we're under a non-disclosure agreement, which says we cannot speak about what we've discussed in our meetings. But since we've had no meetings, that doesn't apply. And for many of us on the committee, it was surprising to see that there was a policy announced without our input.
And so since that policy was announced, have they been in touch with you at all about what happens next with your group?
So we have no role in the current policy, and it's unclear to me, and I'll just be perfectly frank, it's unclear to me what role this group might play going forward, given that there's a policy that's being put forward and implemented starting July 1st. It is an unfortunate situation that the experts you've convened don't have input on the policy you've put in place.
Do you think it might be, and I've heard of this operating in sport before, where, expert groups are put together, their expertise is not really sought, but it enables them to say that they've had an expert group?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be charitable to World Boxing. I mean, the World Boxing emerged from a lot of drama and debate over the earlier federation, which governed boxing. And World Boxing was a creature of the IOC and emerged earlier, just in February 2025, as a new IF, International Federation. So, I would say, charitably, they've got a lot of irons in the fire. They have a lot of things to deal with. And so, I don't know that there's anything malicious or improper here. It might just be that they're, having a lot of things to deal with, and the right hand is not talking to the left hand, but that leads to some bad policies when you're not all coordinated and stitched up.
Well, let's go back a little, because I know when they announced that this policy would be coming out, and originally they said July 1, right. That date has passed. They then had to issue an apology because there was only one athlete they mentioned, and it was the Algerian boxer who I won't name because they then apologised
Right.
for including her name. She was a gold medalist in Paris. But, and everybody knows who I'm talking about because there was so much media attention given at the time. One of the things that I've seen play out numerous times in watching global sport is that quite often there are policies put in place as a reaction to something. And in that regard, is it possible to get the policy right when you're looking at something that happened then, you design a policy around that rather than thinking about your sport globally, playing out day to day, trying to get the best for everybody and for what you stand for? Is this a kind of conflict that you've seen before? Is it a problem in sport?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. In legal settings, there's a saying that says that hard cases make for bad policy. And we saw this before with Caster Semenya and World Athletics, IAAF before that, and really a decade-long really effort to try to push her out of the sport. In boxing, there are important issues to talk about related to eligibility. I mean, obviously, and they involve questions of data and science and evidence and what it means to be eligible for the women's category. And that's perfectly fine. When World Boxing issued their press release with their new policy that really singled out an individual athlete, it probably violated all of the strictures against releasing personal information, identifying an individual athlete. And of course, they stepped back in 2 days and apologized, but the damage was done. Mm. And I mean, eligibility regulations are not about individuals. They're about classifications. And if you think about boxing, boxing has eligibility classifications for weight. And, if you weigh, 100 kilos, you weigh 100 kilos. And so these issues should not be so complicated. They don't have to be focused on individual athletes. They don't have to stigmatize individuals. And so World Boxing has gone down a path that, in my opinion, is unfortunate, and they didn't have to. And this is where I think if they had consulted their experts, they might have avoided some missteps.
So let's talk about that because it is complex. And it's very difficult, even in a lot of the reporting, which the general public then consumes. There's a kind of confusion, I suppose, in some categories. So you've got transgender and you've got DSD. This particular athlete, although mislabeled as transgender early on during the Paris 2024 Olympic Games with another athlete, are not transgender, which kind of only leaves us with the DSD category. Is it possible to describe that in simple terms?
Yeah, I mean, I think people need to think of it procedurally. So there are women who are born female, identified female, assigned female, whatever language you prefer at birth, and then they're raised as females and are female their entire life. There's no changing lanes, so to speak. So this is not about transgender individuals, and that's an important category and worth discussing. This is about females who have always been female with unique biology. And so the argument that's made is that some females with unique biology have an unfair advantage over other females. And that, that's fine. And that's an argument that sends us to the realm of science. So when you talk about unfair advantage, that implies that there's some criteria, some evidence, some metrics that we would look at to say, all right, this woman has an unfair advantage, whether it's how hard she punches, how much she weighs, her strength, whatever it happens to be. This is where it moves from identity politics into science and evidence. And people's eyes roll back in their head when you start talking about science and evidence. But it's not about who she is. She is who she is. She's a female. She's always been a female. So the question is, how do we measure unfair advantage? And then the burden of proof then is on the International Federation, World Boxing, to identify what an unfair advantage is. So it moves very quickly from the hot politics of gender politics to questions of science, data, evidence, which are difficult and contested, but those are the sort of things that sports organizations deal with all the time.
Is it possible to identify which set of data you would use, which measurements, in order to come up with a fair policy that says you do have an unfair advantage? Because I guess the difficulty is there's not a big group to start with to get
Right.
data that is going to be reliable, and this might be where the science is contested, is it not?
Yeah. Yeah, so we have good precedent here. So think about athletes who run on prostheses. So they're amputees. They run on what are called cheetah blades. Many people will know of Oscar Pistorius. Maybe a few less will know of Blake Leeper from Los Angeles, who tried to run in Tokyo 2021. But the question for these athletes is not, are you an amputee, but given that you're an amputee and you run on prostheses, do you have an unfair advantage? And so these athletes go into the lab, they run on tracks, they're measured. Scientists contest different perspectives, and ultimately judgments are made if they are fair or unfair. And actually, Australia and Australian sport is a world leader in gender issues, in identifying individuals, evaluating person by person, sport by sport, discipline by discipline, and identifying whether they have an unfair advantage over their competitors. These are judgment calls, and they will be based on evidence. And some women will make the cut, and some won't. And it's not about identity politics and who's a woman and who's not a woman. It's about, given that society brings these women to sport, who may or may not have an unfair advantage. And let me say, in a sport like boxing or judo or a combat sport, the criteria will be different than are in fencing or shooting or archery or women's gymnastics. And people need to get comfortable with the fact that criteria for inclusion will be complicated, that will be based on evidence, and judgment calls will be made. And that's really the only way to respect the dignity of women who want to have eligibility in the female classification.